Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Searching for Eden virtual book launch party for Keith Madsen. Thank you so much for joining us. And before we kick off the event, I want to read Keith's bio. Most of you probably already know Keith, but here we go. Keith Madsen is a retired minister, well acquainted with the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, as well as the other mythology of the Middle East. He is the author of Sons and Daughters of Toussaint, which was published by Adelaide Books in New York, 2018. And he has published short stories in Mobius, the Journal of Social Change, Talking River, Short Story America, and Adelaide. He is an active member of an authors cooperative, Telltale Authors. Keith lives in East Wenatchee, Washington, with his wife, Kathy, where he has been serving with AmeriCorps, teaching young people about the dangers of opioids, teaching English to immigrants, and helping low-income families with financial asset building. He also teaches children and youth chess and enjoys the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest. Yay!
Absolutely.
Welcome, Keith. And I'm your host, Amy M. Lee. I'm also a member of Telltale Authors, and I am a published author of 3 novels, with another one on the way. And I also have my Quillhawk Publishing, which is an indie publishing company that helps other authors to indie publish. So that's me. And Keith, I know that a lot of people are actually really excited about your book. I personally am very excited about your book, so much so that I actually read it 3 times. And not a lot of people know this, but you and I go back in ways to 2017. When I was just a fledgling learning to write my very first debut novel, and you were on my critique team, and I was critiquing your Searching for Eden. You were critiquing my Snow in Vietnam, and here we are.
Absolutely, yes. And that was just a very formative experience for me as we shared together and were able to appreciate each other's writing. And I remember that as a very, very fondly.
Yeah, that was amazing. So to kick it off, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book?
Okay, absolutely. The book, well, you can't see it now.
Nope.
That's okay. Searching for Eden. And it's a book about a father who 14-year-old daughter dies of cancer. And he doubts if life can be good anymore. And so he decides he's going to go off to the search for the Garden of Eden, where it was said that everything was very good. And so he decides he's going to do that. He's going to search for that area. And he goes on a quest. And there are other people join him in that quest. There's a woman archaeologist, Jessica Santiago, and she's kind of a skeptic about things. So we have a man who actually was a backslidden Christian, and we've got a skeptic, and he meets up with a young teenager who's gone into prostitution to fight for her family, to provide for her family. And she comes along, and she's kind of uncertain about what she believes and who she is. Then they meet up with several Muslims, and they meet up with a Jew. And they're all searching for this place where they can determine whether life can be good again. And so that's what the book's about, searching for Eden. It's a quest. Quest for what makes life good again.
That sounds very interesting. It sounds like our sound is a little distorted. Does anybody sound that way? Hear that distortion? Okay. For me, I know that I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing Keith, and I think Joyce is hearing some distortion for both of us. So hopefully we can still be able to power through. I do apologize for that sound quality. But so Keith, tell me what inspired you to write the book, because that's a lot to take on.
Well, of course, as I mentioned, I was a pastor for over 40 years. And in that process, there were so many families that I dealt with who had losses. Children, parents, brothers and sisters, grandchildren even. And in that process, when you lose somebody that important to you, you do wonder, can life ever be good again? Can I ever recover what life was for me? And so that was one of the sources of inspiration. I wanted to write a book that could speak to that issue. And the other thing was, our world today has kind of uh, drifted so far away from what Eden was supposed to have been, what life was supposed to have been. When God created Eden, it was said that everything was very good. And yet today, what we have is a political situation ruled by lies and distortions and people who are out for self. And in the midst of all that, I think that what inspired me was, can we have a book which inspires us to look back to the way that life was supposed to be? It wasn't supposed to be like that. And can we find our way back to that? And one of the key sentences in the book is, and that we remember from Woodstock, is we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. And that's what it's about. Not literally getting back to the garden, but back to life as good and full of trust and full of truthfulness and honesty. So that's what inspired me to write it.
Well, I feel like you'll be writing this book every single year because it's, I don't know about you, but it just seems like history sometimes tend to repeat itself, and we're just when we think we're taking two steps forward with the political climate or with health and other social issues, something always pulls us back and reminds us, that there's still a lot to be done. So
Yes.
so I think I smell a series coming on for you with your search. Hopefully you'll have it in you. Um, I had the pleasure of watching your trailer, and I don't know if anybody else has seen your book trailer, but I would love for you to share that if you have it with you, and if you're able
Okay.
to share the screen.
Well, that's a key. That's a key question. Can I get the book trailer? Let's see. I'm going to have to. Oh my. Okay. Things are not coming up like they're supposed to come up, but that happens sometimes. Um, ah,
And if you're not able to share the screen, I'll try to share my screen too, because I also have it up on my Facebook
okay.
page.
Why don't you do that then?
Okay.
That might be easier. Okay.
Let's share screen. Bear with me. Let's see, is this my, I don't think it's that one. Where did it go?
Oh, I tell you, something about Zoom and virtual stuff makes things disappear.
I know, right? All right.
Well, that's the pictures.
Those are the pictures, and that's not what I wanted to share.
Okay.
All right. Can you all see that yet? No?
Nope, not yet.
We're just having a great time, aren't we?
Sometimes things work that way. Whoa.
Wow.
Okay, I was just thinking while that was on, that given that we've had technical issues with people getting on and that we're now having technical sound issues, I think what I would like to do is go ahead with this right now, but also then for us to get together and record a separate Zoom session like we did on rehearsal, and then put it on YouTube and people can access it and not have to have all the technical issues. Because I think it was being on Eventbrite that's messed us up, because it was so much simpler and so much better when we were on just Zoom. Nevertheless,
the show must go on.
yes.
That still gives me chills watching that trailer. And the reason why is a lot of things trigger for me in terms of, coming from Vietnam with the Vietnam War and seeing the quest to find freedom, the quest to find something better, and to go back to, like you said, that Eden, that garden where things were simpler. Can you tell me a little bit about how you put together that trailer and kind of the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, well, the trailer really focuses in on what I mentioned about the issues that inspired me to write the book. We look around us at the world today, and of course, this is not new to this particular moment in time, but it does sometimes seem to be getting worse. And the violence that was depicted, the soldier with the rifle pointing at you, the women sold for a price, and all of that is part of what the world was not supposed to be. And so that's what the trailer seeks to put out. How do we look for what we really want to have in life? How do we look for that good life as it was supposed to be? And so that's what I thought to portray in the trailer. And Evan and Jessica and all the others are part of that search, and they're kind of representing us, because they're all imperfect persons, and they're not persons who are absolutely sure what they're looking for or what they're going to find.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, they are on the quest. And I think that that's important. We share together in that quest for what life should be.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, what did you use to put together that trailer? What program did you use?
I used Animoto. And Animoto is, it's a commercial product, but it helps you to put it together for people who don't know how to do videos very well. And it makes it much easier. So yeah, they have a whole range of music you can choose from, and you can pull pictures off of your own computer and add to that pictures that are part of, their stock as well. So yeah, that's what I've been able to do.
Excellent. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And you had talked about going back to the garden, which
Yes,
we know is a song from Woodstock. Is that correct?
that's correct. That's correct.
And
So,
you have a treat for us, I think. Did your son,
yeah,
your daughter-in-law sing the song?
yes, my son and daughter-in-law are going to perform now, and we want to use share screen, and hopefully that it works. And so yeah, it looks like it's going to, and we're going to share that.
He was walking along the road. I asked him, tell me, where are you going? He told stardust, we are golden, we are billion hero carbon, and we got to get ourselves back together. When I walk beside you, I've come to lose the smile, and I feel myself carving something eternal. Maybe it's the time of year, and maybe it's the time of man, and I don't know who I am, but life is wonderful. We are stars, we are golden, we are billion years carbon, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. We are stars, we are golden, we are brilliant, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the light. By the time we got to Woodstock, we were 500,000 strong. Everywhere was a song and a celebration. And I dreamed I saw the summer jet planes riding shotgun in the sky, turning into butterflies above the nation. We are stars, we are golden, we are caught in the middle, and we've got to get ourselves back to the
That was very, very good. I don't know, Keith. I thought that was better than the other two versions. Seriously.
Well, I'm glad you think so. I'm glad you feel that, and I will tell them.
Oh, please do. I mean, I have
Yeah.
my thoughts, and our attendees tonight are pretty quiet. They're all on mute, but you know, you all can feel free to jump on in and engage and talk with us and give us your thoughts. I saw Rita's hand up. Rita, do you have some comments?
I can't. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, because I couldn't hear. I've been going mad. I couldn't hear myself. I couldn't. Deanna Britt. Comments about what? I've been trying to get on all the time.
Yeah. Several people had trouble getting on.
Where are you? You've gone.
Are you in a particular like gallery view, or maybe scroll over if you're on your phone? Anyways, if you paid attention to that video, you probably will know the answer to this trivia question that's coming up. And
I don't know. I don't know any trivia questions.
you never know. You might surprise yourself.
I'm dumb.
Oh, I don't believe that at all. Okay, Keith,
Anyhow.
do you want to cue that question up, or should I?
That's right. Most people know that song was made famous by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, who sang it at Woodstock. And it became a defining song of the generation. But not everybody knows who wrote that song. the famous entertainer, songwriter who wrote it. So the first quiz question for an autographed copy of the book, Searching for Eden. Who wrote the words to the song Woodstock? And write your answer on chat.
Yep. First person to get it right on chat wins an autographed copy. Oh, look at that. I see James White as the first person. Do you, Keith?
That's what I see first.
Yeah, but those are question marks. They aren't sure. They're questioning us. I don't know.
That's absolutely sure. And there's a story behind that.
Tell us the story.
You can go to YouTube and you can listen to her performance of that song. And what happened was that she was supposed to wanted to go to Woodstock, but her agent found out that it was so difficult to get in and out because of all the heavy traffic and the mud there, that they didn't want her to go in because she had a performance on the Dick Cavett show the very next day. And so they didn't want her going. And she kind of regretted that, but she wrote the song and gave it to her friends, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. And she says friends, well, she was dating Graham Nash at the time, as I understand it.
Oh.
So, yes. And she said that she later put it on an album herself, her own album, and she's performed it herself. But the first 3 times she performed it, she said, she broke down in tears. And, I couldn't find exactly what she was feeling about why she broke down in tears, but I think there are probably several reasons. One being that she had wanted to go there and experience the whole festival, and so that probably made her sad. But I think maybe also the idealism of that song. The idealism of that song is powerful. And sometimes when we get caught up in a powerful idealism and we don't see it happening, it can be sad. And I think about that too, in regard to Woodstock, because I have a feeling that of the 500,000 people who gathered at Woodstock, that's an approximate number, 500,000 strong, that some of those today are CEOs and mid-level management of companies that are destroying the land and are taking advantage of workers because they lost that idealism. Mm-hmm. The world has lost the idealism. And right now, I think that people are cynical. You see the phrase sometimes, life is a bitch and then you die. And some people earnestly believe that. That's what life is. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to get a new idealism in our world. I think that's what the searching for Eden is about. Returning to the idealism. We've got to get ourselves back to the garden.
Yeah. So James has a question for you, Keith. Did you apply for rights to use the song in your book?
Yes, I did apply for those rights. And I applied to the persons that said that, or that had the rights to the music. They never replied back. So I did talk to communicate by email to the person who's head of the company, but they never gave me any final reply. But one of the things they said was, if I'm not using the song itself in a commercial way, and it's only going on YouTube where it's available to anybody, then okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think in the book you reference it, but you don't actually have the actual lyrics, right? And
That's right. That's right. I don't have the lyric in the book.
yeah, so you should be fine. But that's a really good question and one that every author
Well,
needs to think
we
of.
have to be careful about using people's property without permission.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
right.
All right. And it looks like Jim is going to hop off because he's got some traveling going on. But let me ask you this, Keith. Is the Garden of Eden real? And in the book, is it a real place?
Okay, in the book, we leave the reader to come to their own conclusion. For me, the question is, what is truth? What is true? What is not true? And to me, it's not an issue of whether or not it was a real place. The issue is whether or not the idea behind it was a real idea. That this world was created to be good. And for people to have a harmony with the universe around them, like is described in the garden. And that's what it was created to be. That is what is real, what is true. Now, whether or not there is actual place, you'll have different people who very much disagree on that issue. Carl Jung, great psychologist, said that in his mind, it's a mythology. It's a story that has a bigger meaning than the actual place of whether it was real or not. The mythology of it is, he says, it parallels human development. He said that what you start off with naked and unashamed as a baby. And you have to learn shame, or you do learn shame, and you get away from the innocence that you once had. And so it is kind of an evolution that parallels the story of the Garden of Eden. And then pretty soon you become an adult and you start to wonder, where did I lose it? Where did I lose the joy I see in children? And the innocence and the trust and the love that I see in the little children around me. Where did I lose that? And I think that that's what that's about. And I think our country and our world looks for that. Yeah. So what was the question again?
Question was, is the Garden of Eden real? And in your book, is
real?
It real?
Yes. Okay. I said that there, Carl Jung thought that it was real, but not a physical place. It's a real idea, it's an important idea. There are those who believe that it's a physical place. And,
Rita thinks. Go ahead, Rita.
Go ahead.
May I say something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Eden is within ourselves. And I think that's where you find it, in ourselves. And I think if what you've experienced in life has an effect on all of us. And I think also people are born with a sense of goodness, and there's a sense of badness too in people, but the goodness overrides the bad. Now, Eden is definitely within all of us, and we look for that when we're a child. And I went through the war, the Second World, almost said the First World War, the Second World War. And I remember I came out of it a complete person, because I saw things that were really shocking and terrible, and that I can't explain, but Eden is within us. That's where it is, and that's where it resides. And if you look for it, you'll find it. But some people haven't got the capacity to look for it. And that is a tragic thing, to be born without that capacity. And that's my view.
That's
okay.
Beautiful.
Well, there are people that believe in it as a literal place. And
yes.
The archaeologist, Dr. David Roll, who believes that it is a literal place. And he did some archaeological work and came to some conclusions about where it might have been. But in between literal place and total myth, there is the idea that maybe this story had its beginning in something that happened and in a place. You know, it started with that and then it grew into something bigger. That's probably where I would find myself. And so I think that's where Evan eventually finds himself. So, you know, you find this place that kind of encapsulates what maybe it was like. And it gives you that sense that there is maybe some hope. So, you know, we looked at that, and I did a lot of studying about the people who believe it was real and where it might be. And I got some pictures, or actually you've got the pictures now. What thoughts about that?
Well, I think the book was beautifully written and brilliantly written. I thought that it gave enough nuggets for the believers, you know, for the searchers who wanted to go on the journey with you and with Evan and the others, but also it gave something to the literalists too, who really believe that there truly is a physical place, a Garden of Eden. So I do have the pictures, but I think if I go through the pictures, it'll kind of spark one of the answers for our trivia questions. What do you think? Before we do that, how about we go into the cosmic apples, the cosmic crisp trivia? That's the one I'm really excited about, even though I'm not eligible to win. That's fine. I'll just order my own. So does anybody know, and the first person to enter this correctly in the chat will win these cosmic crisp apples, which maybe before I do that, Keith, do you want to tell us what these apples are, why they're so special?
Yes, cosmic crisp apples. They were developed. I live in Wenatchee, Washington, which is considered to be the apple capital of the world. And they have worked for 20 years on a new variety of apple. And it was just released, I believe, last year. And it is now on the market in Washington State and will soon be across the country. But this apple is a combination of two varieties, one being the Honeycrisp, which is known for its crispness and its sweetness, and the Empire apple, which is a little bit tart. And so those two apples were brought together in this cosmic crisp apples that were grown in the Garden of Eden. No, not so much.
Almost had me fooled there.
No, they were grown locally. And I think if it were in fact true that the tree, the fruit that Eve gave Adam wasn't a fruit, it was an apple, this would have been it. You know, this would have been the kind of apple that you would have given. Now, the reality is it wasn't an apple. That's tradition. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But if it were an apple, it'd be cosmic crisp. They are delicious. And I've got a dozen of those in a nice basket that I will ship to those whoever wins this trivia contest.
Super. All right, here we go. The question is, name the two rivers that flow through the Garden of Eden.
Two of the rivers. There's actually four of them. So name two
rivers. Name two of the rivers that flow through the Garden of Eden. Liz.
Elizabeth Pro. All right, Liz.
Winner, cosmic apple dinner. She's got it.
All right.
Excellent. Good job. Okay, so let's go through some pictures and I will share my screen and you can talk through it, yeah?
Yep. All right.
All right. There we go.
Okay, so people have wondered where the Garden of Eden is. And different people have speculated different things. Here in that first picture, you've got a picture of what's described as the Garden of Eden in Lucas, Kansas. And it was kind of created by this guy who really wanted to project the Garden of Eden. And, so some people say, hell, maybe it was in Kansas, or some Mormons believed it was in Jackson County, Missouri. I was raised in Kansas. I spent a good deal of my life in Kansas and part of my life in Missouri. And I can tell you that Garden of Eden is not in Kansas, not in Missouri. So, but this was this guy that in Lucas, Kansas, that put this together to kind of project the Garden of Eden. Okay, next.
Very interesting photo.
Yeah. Those who have looked at it as an actual location, most of those look toward the Persian Gulf in the Mesopotamian Valley. Here we have a picture here of the Persian Gulf. And you'll notice at the top there left that there's a couple of little river beds moving out of there. That's the Tigris and the Euphrates. They empty into the Persian Gulf. And a lot of people believe that if there was in fact a Garden of Eden, it is now immersed in the Persian Gulf. The Tigris and Euphrates are mentioned as rivers that flow through Eden, so that is part of that argument. So next slide here.
What are the other two rivers, Keith?
Oh, the Gihon and the Pishon, I think is how you pronounce it. And people don't know where in the world those rivers were. Although, if you look at David Roll's material, he'll have theories. Now, they're at the Persian Gulf. This is a nuclear plant that Iran built on the edge of the Persian Gulf. And really, this is a part of the book. Because in the midst of this land where life seems to have begun, culture, civilization seems to have begun, and where the Garden of Eden seems to have been nearby, we find the biggest fight over nuclear weaponry that can destroy the world. This plant is, the Iranians say that it is built for nuclear energy for legitimate purposes, and others question that. But it is a symbol of that tension in the region. Okay, next. Now, for those who believe that it was in the Persian Gulf, this is an important place, and this is an important tree. Because there is an island nation in the Persian Gulf called Bahrain. Bahrain, at one point in its early history, was called Dilmun. And Dilmun was a center of several legends, where it was said to be a place where life was ideal and people had everything they needed, and old men and old women didn't feel decrepit. They were happy and feeling whole, and everything was good on the island of Dilmun. And that became the island nation of Bahrain. Now, in that island nation of Bahrain, this tree is in the middle of a huge desert. And people look at this tree and they cannot understand how for hundreds of years it has lived in this desert, because there's no evidence of a source of nutrition or water. And the locals call this tree the tree of life. And even have had legends where are reports that vicious angels guard this tree sometimes. So the tree of life, a center part of what the story is all about. Okay, next.
Hey Keith, is that a gate around that tree trunk, or is
That's a fence around it. It's a fence.
Okay.
I think they'd rather not people climb.
But it's still climbable.
Yeah, it is. It looks like it could be a fun climb. One of the things that, as we talk about in the book, and as I've thought about it in biblical history, is that when people lost the garden, in terms of the mythology of the story, they longed for what they had lost. And so they built what are called ziggurats that were kind of built as towers up into the heavens to somehow reach where God was. And this is the ziggurat at Chaga Zanbil, and it plays a role in the book. But it was felt to be a place where people could get closer to God by climbing up high towards the heavens. And yet that didn't quite work for them. But it is part of the effort that we are all making to get back to what we've lost.
And this is the one that's in your book.
That's right. This is the central one in the book. That's right.
Okay.
Chaga Zanbil. And Evan climbs it, hoping to find something as a clue to what he's searching for.
And how many ziggurats do you think we still have left?
I think there are, well, maybe 100 or so, but there used to be many more. Part of the issue with that is that this is a center of war. And every war they have in the Middle East destroys archaeological digs and finds that are thousands of years old. The ISIS intentionally destroyed many old archaeological digs because they thought that they were counter to God and they didn't give glory to God. But war has unintentionally destroyed many of them. So many ziggurats have been destroyed by war. This one is not.
You know what I found interesting in your book was the mention of Christians living in Iran, Iraq.
That's right. That's right.
Muslim country. Yeah.
Christians living in Iran go back to the Bible times.
Yeah.
Where it's talked at the Pentecost, the Acts. There were people there that were from Persia, which is today Iran. And so that's where they were from. And the Christians there have existed from that time, but they've had different views than the official theology of initially the Roman Catholic Church. And so they were considered heretics, these Christians in that area. And I think that's been one of the tragedies of Christian history, is that if somebody differs from you, you declare them to be a heretic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now this is another ziggurat. This is near the ancient city of Ur, where Abraham was originally from. Now, who's Abraham? Abraham was the father really of three of our major religions: Christianity, Judaism, and also Islam. And so that's very important. Ur is not far from the Persian Gulf. And so that lends credence to the idea that that's where the Garden of Eden was, because this was an early story that evolved during this time, the story of Abraham. And this is a ziggurat that was near the city of Ur. You notice out front, you've got military vehicles. And see Jessica, who's an archaeologist, and dedicated so extremely to her talent. Jessica just broke down in tears when she saw military vehicles around this place, because it just was a violation of what once was. We're getting a lot of clicking noises. I'm not sure where that comes from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead
now,
and mute yourself if you're not muted already.
Okay. This is Dr. David Roll. Dr. David Roll is an archaeologist from the University College London. He reasoned that Genesis said the garden was near the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates, not where it emptied into the Persian Gulf. Because Genesis talks about it one river becoming four and flowing out of the Garden of Eden. And so that's why he thought that if you were looking for an actual place, you wouldn't look for it in the Persian Gulf. You would look for it in near where the headwaters of those rivers are. Now, over time, rivers change their course. But it seemed to him to be evident that the mountains in the northern part of Iran or the southern part of Syria would have been the place where this was. And he also read about an area in the ancient Sumerian cuneiform clay tablets held by the Museum of the Orient in Istanbul. And he read especially from a 5,000-year-old epic called Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata. Now, this wasn't the Bible. This was a document from the Sumerian culture, but it told of a route taken by an emissary of the Sumerian king of Europe to a plain they called Eden, E-D-I-N, which was known to the Sumerians as a land of happiness and plenty. And the route this epic described took him to the foot of Mount Seyhan, near the city of Tabriz. And it was there that he found what he thought might have been the site for the Garden of Eden.
Wow.
He is a believer in the physical place. Now, this is a map of the area that he thought where it might be. Over in the lower right-hand corner, that is where the Persian Gulf is. And then the rivers coming out of that, those are the Tigris and Euphrates. And the red area, which is mountainous, is where he thought it might have been. And they're, of course, mountainous, but a valley in between that would have been a lush valley. And this is a picture of Mount Seyhan in that area. And, he very much believed that up in that area, somewhere was where it started. And part of what he also said was the ziggurats that reached up, he thought might have been part of an expression of those whose living started in the mountainous areas of around Mount Seyhan. We're trying to recreate those mountains as ziggurats. And this is just a picture of, that what it might have looked like, according to some artists. But in the valley, there is a great river, a little river and a great waterfalls, and it's called Aji Chai, which in the native dialect there means walled garden. And that's part of the argument that he'd have also for this being the area.
Beautiful. Certainly makes you believe that there is a real Garden of Eden.
Well, I think what it says to me was that not necessarily it might have been a real Garden of Eden, but at least a real experience that people had that gave rise to the story. What we do know is the story does seem to be quite ancient and distributed between different cultures.
Okay, well, that kind of gets us into the third trivia question, actually. You guys ready? Get your fingies ready. You're going to type them into the chat. Wake up. Okay, so obviously the Garden of Eden has inspired songs, books, movies, etc. And other than your book, I'm thinking of one other novelist who wrote a book about Eden, and it's about the same theme, the loss of innocence and exile. This American author was a Nobel Prize winner. He wrote several well-known books also, including The Grapes of Wrath. And what else did he write? Of Mice and Men.
Don't give any more clues. That's no more clues.
I'm waiting for somebody to type something. Okay.
You got something.
Liz and Carol and Donna are correct. But I think since Liz has already won once, we'll give it to Carol. And Carol wins What does Carol win? She wins, was it the album?
Yes, I think that was the album for Woodstock.
For Woodstock. Yay. So we'll make sure that, let me write this down, that we have Carol, or yeah, Carol winning.
Okay.
Yay. Okay. So what we have left are another copy of Searching for Eden and then a copy of Snow in Vietnam. So we've got 2 more trivia questions coming up. But before we go into there, I would love, since we have some time, Keith, would you mind doing a reading for us? And
Absolutely.
did you kind of give us some context to what you're reading?
Yeah, this is actually toward the end of the story. You generally don't, it's not at the end, it's toward the end. You don't normally want to reveal much of the end, but to me, it just so encapsulates the spirit of what the search was all about that I wanted to read it. And what it is, of course, you have these 5 characters, actually several characters, who are searching for this place. And they end up running afoul of the Iranian government because some of their searching was near nuclear sites. And the Iranian government's after them, so they're seeking a place to hide, and they end up hiding in this place that David Rohl had thought of as the Garden of Eden. And so the people who find themselves there are Evan, who had lost his daughter to cancer and searching for the good life, and Jessica, who was a cynical scientist, and yet she also was searching for something better. She had had a bad experience in an earlier marriage and was having trouble trusting again. You know, a lot of people end up with that experience where their love experience didn't go right and they have trouble trusting again. And that's what's true with her. And then Carmen, who had been a teenage prostitute and adopted by Evan and Jessica to take on this journey because they wanted her along. And so she came. And then they picked up along the way a little 5-year-old Iranian girl, or actually Iraqi girl, who was just running, crying alongside the road in the midst of fleeing from an attack, and had apparently lost her mother and her father. And Carmen was so overwhelmed that she had in common with this little girl, having lost parents. And she just jumped out of the car and ran after her, and they took this little girl with them. So her name's Amina. So here is a section of the story. They're coming down into the valley. Jessica pointed toward a river cascading down a snow-capped mountain. That river is called Aji Chai by the locals, which in their local dialect means walled garden. They believe the mountain from which it comes, Mount Seyhan, is sacred, and they attribute magical powers to the river. The travelers continued to descend past lush, thick plant life, large groves of fruit trees, whether planted or growing naturally. Evan couldn't tell, or to the right. Ahead of them, where the river to which Jessica alluded emptied, was a small azure lake. Wow, it's gorgeous, whispered Carmen. How did that guy ever find this? asked Evan. Well, that's part of the evidence too, replied Jessica. He read about it in an ancient Sumerian cuneiform clay tablets held by the Museum of the Orient in Istanbul. Most helpful to him was a 5,000-year-old epic called Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata. It told of a route taken by an emissary of the Sumerian king of Uruk to a plain they called Eden, which was known to the Sumerians as a land of happiness and plenty. This place was rich in the gold and lapis lazuli the king needed to decorate a temple. The route this epic described took him to the foot of that mountain, Mount Seyhan, and so he found this beautiful valley. You mentioned locals, said Evan. I don't see any. Jessica shrugged. I'm not sure why. Maybe, like with many rural mountain cultures, they were lured by the attraction of the bigger cities. Or just as likely, said Dr. Goldman, they lost their innocence and were cast out of the garden. Evan glanced around as he drove. A light rain had recently fallen, and a rainbow arched over a distant forest. Everything around him looked like it came straight from a fairy tale. He stopped the car when the dirt road ended. Without even speaking, everyone exited the car and went in different directions. Evan, for his part, walked past several fruit trees to a small path which meandered into a thick forest. And as he wandered leisurely down the path, the smells of the forest, the pine, the decaying mulch, and the moist earth filled his nostrils and intoxicated his spirit. Birds of an infinite variety of colors sang and flew overhead. The voices seemed to be less ones of screeching warning than of exuberant celebration of life, voices that provided the harmonic background to a world which blended as one. Suddenly, a large bird landed on Evan's shoulder. He sucked in his breath and for a moment thought of pulling away and swatting at the invader. But just as the thought came to his mind, he froze in place. The bird was perhaps 10 inches tall and was black with both red and blue markings. He showed no skittishness about having landed on a life form so much larger than he. He simply looked Evan in the eye and cocked his head to one side, as if he had just asked a profound philosophical question. Evan noticed the sharpness of the bird's beak and considered how easy it would be for the creature to use it as a weapon, jabbing at Evan's eye and blinding him. And yet Evan deliberately put up no barrier to such possible assault. Rather, he slowly lifted his finger to a place in front of the bird's head, and the bird responded by rubbing his face against it, as might a common house cat when greeted by its owner. And as suddenly as he had arrived, the bird flew away. The flowers Evan saw along the path may not have been as forward or at least as mobile as the bird had been, and yet in their own way, they also invited Evan to come close. Their colors were vibrant, and try as he might, he could find no evidence of gnawing insects, disease, or the discoloration that comes from inadequate nutrition. They would have been the pride of his wife's garden. Evan smiled. This was a place where Sarah would have come, at least until he came along and pointed out other places to go. Was this the place Sarah had pictured in her mind when she had asked him to read of the garden? Evan could certainly feel her presence, but for the first time sensing that presence was not accompanied by sadness. It was accompanied by a feeling of peace, a feeling of acceptance that life had gone on unabated. Evan continued down the path and came to a rock formation. As far back as he could remember, he had never come to a rock formation that did not invite him to climb it. And that is what he did. Each step upward invited another until Evan came to the top, a rocky crag that extended over the lake below. The water was so clear he could see fish swimming in large schools, well below the surface. These were not tiny, newly spawned fish, but large ones, which, if caught, would overflow a skillet, even when filleted and trimmed. And yet catching them in such a place would seem a violation, not of human law, but of a divine system. As Evan breathed in the freshness of the air around him and felt the warmth of the sun shining down from a now nearly cloud-free sky, tears came to his eyes, and he did not know why. He brushed the tears away and scanned the view before him, from the grandeur of the mountains encircling him to the thick green forest, the pristine lake, and the rich soil that gave life to a more varied biome than he had ever remembered seeing before. All the life around him fit perfectly together. Some movement at the water's edge down below drew his attention. Carmen emerged from behind some trees, fully naked and carrying an equally naked little Amina. Jessica, also having shed all her clothing, with the exception of the cast which remained on her leg, followed right behind. Evan's initial reaction was to turn away. He sought to shield their private moment from his own eyes that had been polluted by a lifetime of being male in a culture of sexual obsession, eyes which held in them the DNA of sin accumulated from the millennia of living outside the garden. But then Evan remembered a passage from the Bible, a passage originally read for his mind, but which now spoke to his spirit. They were naked and were not ashamed. As Evan looked down at the females at the water's edge, he saw no shame. Carmen frolicked in the cool, clear water, diving under its surface, only to emerge again in a leap, lifting the lake's waters toward the heavens. And as she did, Evan could see the cleansing permeating the young girl's spirit. Her lithe young body, so quintessentially female, was declaring its emancipation from what necessity and human lust had pressed it into becoming. She was emerging as an entirely new creature. And yet she was also an incredibly old creature, a reflected image of womanhood's beginning. The smile on her face and the giggle in her laugh was the smile and giggle of a little girl, unweighted by her past and alive with the love of life. Carmen once again dove beneath the water and emerged like a leaping dolphin that fully expected to leave the confines of the earth. Evan saw it as a hymn of praise to God. Amina stood waist deep in the water closer to the shore, and Evan was amazed that her eyes, once seemingly so old, now sparkled. She watched the girl who had carried her into the water and sought to mimic Carmen's actions, only instead of leaping up high once, she made a series of little jumps while she spun in a circle and splashed the water. She was cleansing both body and mind of the blood that had been spilled in front of her, at the same time being water birthed into a world of innocence. Above them both, with her naked body standing firm, erect, and stretched out with her arms to heaven, was Jessica. He could see her wipe tears from her eyes, but an ecstatic smile on her lips transformed the meaning of those tears. She stood as if an only recently sculpted masterpiece of her creator, emerging from the rock on which she stood and the plaster of her cast to flow alive into the heavens.
Wow.
Searching
Thank
for
you.
Eve.
I love readings. I could listen to readings all day long. Thank you. That was wonderful. All right, so we've got 2 more trivia questions, and then we're going to go into Q&A. So question number 4 is not really a trivia. It's more of a participation. And I'm feeling generous tonight. So anybody who responds and participates will actually get a copy of my book. Here we go. What's your idea of Eden? What does that mean to you? And go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to share and participate. And Rita, you automatically get one because you already told us what your Eden was, which I thought was beautiful.
I'm of the cynical persuasion. I'm of the cynical persuasion. So I guess my Eden doesn't exist.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Fair enough. Rita, go ahead and unmute yourself. Oh, you got to unmute. Or not. Rita. Rita, unmute yourself. Maybe you should say something, Keith. My voice doesn't seem to ring through.
Rita, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, well, she's having trouble with that. Maybe we can come back to her.
Okay.
James has got.
There she goes. You're gonna have to give your spiel again, Rita.
Oh, I was just, you read beautifully. It's a book I'm going to read because it's beautiful. And I think everyone wants to find Eden. But as I said, is there an Eden to find, or is Eden within ourselves, the real Eden? And do we find it within ourselves? It's a wonderful idea. It's beautiful. And of course, Keith is a beautiful writer. I mean, I've read his other book, and his writing is beautiful. It's definitely going to read this, because if for nothing else, just for the beauty of his writing. But Eden it's in all of us, and we all want to find Eden. And maybe some of us we have found it in happiness, within ourselves. I mean, is it a place? Is it a real place, or what?
Yeah, that's beautifully said. My Eden is somewhere where there's 20 acres plus of land and I don't know, just a cabin, log cabin with a river or a lake on the property, and just natural wildlife with my family. That's my idea of Eden. Just simple, living the simple life with no traffic, no cell phones, no a little bit off the grid.
It's simple is the most beautiful life.
Yes.
We unfortunately complicate it, but it is really simple. That's how yes. Anyway, it's beautiful.
That idea is part of the song Woodstock also, where it talks about getting back to the land and getting away from a world that's made a bargain with the devil. And that's what the song talks about.
What's your idea of Eden, Keith?
Well, I think what Rita says is good. However, one of the things that I would say is that if Eden is only within ourselves, while on the outside it is hell, we failed to transfer what's on the inside of us to others. I think that the idea, one of the things that it talks about in the book is Dr. Goldman, a Jewish archaeologist, talks about this. He says that Eden is not a place to retreat to permanently. It's a place to get away and then come back to the ugly, dirty world to change it.
Yes.
And I think that is true, because you don't want to just say, oh, it's beautiful inside here where I am. It's got to be something where we have something to give. And we don't want the world to be hell for people.
Dr. Goldman was my favorite character in the book.
Dr. Goldman was?
Yeah, he was cerebral, but also intuitive, and he was kind of funny. He had that little sense of humor. So yeah, when this book becomes a movie, we'll have to figure out who's going to play Dr. Goldman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So question number 5, which you may know if you've already if you paid attention. So remember the pictures that we were showing, and name the archaeologist who was pictured, who was from London, who believed that there was a real Garden of Eden place. Ding, 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 ding. And Dr. Guy wearing a cool hat.
That hat reminded me of who was it?
See, Carol, Kathy can't play.
It reminded me of Indiana Jones.
I know. Starts with an R, ends with an L. Middle letters R. All right. Well, gosh darn it. It was Dr.
I think we should say that The correct answer is guy wearing a cool hat.
Okay.
Well, the name of the archaeologist is Dr. David Rohl, R-O-H-L. And by the way, if you are interested in hearing or finding out more about his views, which aren't mine, but you have influenced mine, you can go to YouTube and Google, or you can Google, or you can check out Dr. David Rohl and the Garden of Eden, and you will find a very interesting video on YouTube.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
It's not that kind of launch party, right? So we can't watch it here. Okay, so I think question number 5 goes to Liz, and that was the Searching for Eden copy. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
All right. So we have about 13 minutes left, and we'll open it up to questions and answers. If anybody has any questions, I see 2 D's on my screen, Deanna and Debrit, which I know that I think they're the same person. There she
Questions,
is.
comments, answers, anything. Yeah.
Hi, Dee.
I have been here for most of it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been here for most of it, but I didn't have it through Zoom. I had it through something else, and so I couldn't see any of you guys. I could hear you. Keith, I loved what you read, man. That was just awesome. And
thank you.
And you know, you posed the question about our Eden. I think my Eden would just be a place where people weren't selfish and they thought of other people, and love was not it was prevalent, and it wasn't something you had to chase after so much. So that would be my Eden. Kindness and love that is freely shown to everybody, regardless of what you look like or who you are.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that.
Donna has a question. How long did the book take you to write, Keith?
Forever.
Since 2017, 2016?
Actually, it was even before that as I thought about it. But yeah, I wrote it originally as an ebook and then didn't like the way it came out. And I didn't like the marketing on it as an ebook. And so I rewrote the entire thing using Amy and others as my writers group to kind of formulate it. So that goes back to at least 2015. And part of it is rewriting it and trying to touch it up and make it exactly what I want it to be. And part of it, of course, was marketing it, you know, which is a tough process today.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did anybody, who's read the book? Okay. So
I have.
I hope so. So maybe this is a question for Liz and me, but which, by the way, Liz and Dee, I don't know if you guys made the connection.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I did the contest thing.
Yes,
yeah.
You did, and Dee was our chair for the contest.
Yeah, we had a lot of correspondence back and forth.
Good, thank you. So, Liz, did you have a favorite character?
Well, I think probably Jessica, because she was an archaeologist. So I've always been interested in archaeology. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and then I found out it's really boring. You just sift dirt all day. I said, well, that's no fun. You know, I wanted to discover the tomb of King Tut and all the gold and stuff. I didn't want to stand and just sift dirt all day. That's just too boring. So yeah, but she was my favorite character because at one point I did want to be an archaeologist, and I do have an interest in all things history, particularly history that is so far in the past and is very, to me, difficult to know. And so people putting together those clues in a valid kind of way, I just think is really fascinating and remarkable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions? I have a question about your cover. Tell us a little bit about the cover. Like, why did you choose that cover? Who worked on your cover? Were there any pain points in putting together the cover?
Yeah, well, who helped me with the cover? A woman named Amy M. Lee referred me to a person who does covers for her. And Virginia, that's her name, isn't it? Okay. And she put the cover together. And what's in it? Well, you know, what you see are two people looking in the same direction. The adults are looking in the same direction. They're searching. And behind them are the ancient stairs and the forest. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of the ziggurats and, you know, looking around. And he's got a map that they're looking at. But Carmen's off to the left, and she's not looking that way. Why? Because, you know, she's along for the ride, but she's part of a group. She's part of the group. And she is more interested in the relationships of being there with people than of where they're going. So that's what I see in the cover.
I have a confession that it took me the third time reading your book to like her. Because, and I don't know if anybody else would feel this way, but when I first read about Carmen, I thought she came across as a spoiled teenage brat, which most teenage brats or most teenagers can be. And so at first when I read it, I thought, oh my God, she's so annoying. And then the second time I read it, I was like, I understand now. I appreciate it. And I appreciate her journey and where she came full circle. And then I started to like, okay, I can dig this girl.
Well, as a writer, I think that it's really important for characters to evolve.
Yes.
If your story doesn't change characters, you might as well not read it or write it. Characters change in the story, and we change in life. And I was talking to Amy earlier, you know, the other day, and how as a writer, you don't always know where your book's going when you write it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you plan to write something to happen, and then it's almost like the character says, "Wait a minute, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going there. You've got to rewrite this thing." So the character comes alive for you, and that changes the story because they're real people, and they become real.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we discovered you're a pantser like me. Like let the characters run our life. Well, as we wrap up, Keith, where can we find your book? Where can we find you? And what is next on your project list?
Yeah, you can find the book on Amazon right now. I'm trying to get it on also on bookstore.org.
Bookshop.
Is that right? Bookshop.org. But I have to get it on Sparks, Ingram Sparks. Excuse me, in order to do that. And that's proved a little more challenging than I thought it would be. So anyway, I'm wanting to put it there. But right now, you can definitely get it on Amazon. And so, you know, encourage people to do that. And you can get it either in paperback form or as an ebook. So, and in fact, you can read it for free as an ebook as part of their, what do they call that?
Kindle Unlimited.
Kindle Unlimited, that's right, Kindle Unlimited. Mm-hmm. And so those are the ways that you can watch it now. One of the things I think I want to do, and as I mentioned earlier, is to go over this again on Zoom where we don't have the technical issues and put it on YouTube so you can go back to it and share it with other people. So people who were wanting to be on here but couldn't get in can see it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important. So next projects. Well, I'm not sure what my next writing projects will be. Right now, I am very dedicated to getting these books out that I've written in red. As those of you know who are authors yourself, your book becomes your baby, your child.
Yeah.
And you want your child to live and to be loved. And so that's what it's about. It's not even about making money off of it. It's not really even full. I want to, but it's not entirely about that. It's about wanting what you've created to have a life for other people than yourself. So that's what's next is for me right now is just to get it out in red.
Super. Well, we can't wait to see what's next. And one last thing is, are you mostly on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter?
Yes, we're not on Twitter, but I am on Instagram as Keith the Writer Guy. That's my Instagram, I guess you call it a handle, I'm not sure. But I'm mostly on Instagram and on Facebook. And so I can be found both places. And I will make sure that I continue to get out messages on Instagram and on Facebook. And if somebody can just anesthetize me long enough, I might also get on Twitter. I don't know.
Well, I'm like, don't go there. Well, excellent. Any final thoughts? Any final questions before we sign off? Okay. Well, we'll be in touch, especially with the winners. We'll be in touch to get your addresses and send off some books and album and whatever apples to you.
They have their addresses on the registration.
We have email addresses, so we'll connect via email and get that information.
Yeah, well, I get the addresses so we can get these things sent. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
All
my
right.
cosmic apples are eager for a new home.
Well, if anybody wants to put in my address on accident for those cosmic apples.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Thank you so much for joining tonight, and we will talk to you all soon.
Yeah. I'll be in touch, Amy.
Okay, sounds good.